Let's bring in our panel, Senior White House Correspondent Kelly Wright and Michael O'Hanlon, Senior Fellow and Director of Research in Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Gentlemen, welcome. Kelly, let's start with you. What are you hearing from the White House tonight about this meeting and whether Putin is actually willing to strike a deal?
So, Jenna, good evening to you. First of all, President Trump said earlier today on Truth Social that great progress was made during Special Envoy Witkoff's meeting with President Putin of Russia today in Moscow. The Russians expressed their desire to meet with President Trump. That statement coming from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, who says the president is open to meeting with both President Vladimir Putin of Russia and President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. President Trump wants this brutal war to end. She did not indicate when, if or where this meeting would take place, but it's substantial to know that out of this meeting today, that Russia has reached out to the President of the United States to actually ask for a meeting that could possibly take place next week. We don't know where, when, or if this will take place, but we'll keep it under our watchful care. Yeah,
that would certainly be something. Michael, from a strategic standpoint, how much leverage do these new sanction threats really give the United States? And then what happens if Friday comes and goes and there's no deal, no ceasefire reached?
Yeah, great questions, Jenna. Well, these kinds of new economic instruments are exactly what a lot of the strategic community has been hoping that President Trump would be willing to invoke and apply against Russia, with the view that so far, President Putin has more or less figured out a way to tolerate the pain that his country is suffering. And Putin himself has obviously a very great tolerance for other people's pain, whether Russian or Ukrainian, and seems to think he's fighting a holy war, and therefore the costs are worth it. So the only way to change that calculus is to apply a lot more pressure. And these kinds of secondary tariffs or sanctions that President Trump is threatening could actually make a big difference. I am skeptical that the possibility of additional tariffs or sanctions will be enough to change Vladimir Putin's mind. This is a guy who's been fighting this war 3.5 years already. He's obviously viewing it in grand historical terms as well as his own role. He thinks time is on his side in terms of his country being bigger, stronger, more prosperous, more populated than Ukraine. And he doubts, I think, our political commitment, given that, yes, President Trump's been threatening sanctions, but hasn't really yet applied them. So I hope very much that we follow through. I agree with what President Trump's threatening, at least in broad brush, but I'd be surprised, and I think we should not expect that this is going to immediately end the war.
Yeah. Kelly, the Kremlin's called the talks useful, constructive. Is the White House interpreting that as a signal of real progress or more just lip service from Putin?
Look, to Michael's point, the president is very watchful, very leery, very skeptical about Vladimir Putin because of what he's done. He says one thing in public, and as you know, and you've heard the president talk about it before, he goes out and bombs people in the cold of night. Now, countering the Russian Federation's threat to U.S. national security and foreign policy is that threat. Friday, he could start imposing those sanctions on Russia, and the Russian Federation's actions in Ukraine pose an ongoing threat to the U.S. national security and foreign policy. The White House stipulating that it's important for them to necessitate stronger measures to address the national emergency that does exist. They're even looking at India's importation of Russian Federation oil, which undermines U.S. efforts to counter Russia's harmful activities. They'll impose tariffs on them as well, which would be those secondary sanctions.
Yeah, Michael, on those strikes, the latest strikes in Ukraine, that was pretty striking to see this meeting happening, and Putin is striking Ukraine. What did you make of that? What does that say about where things stand?
Yeah, I think Kelly put it great. I mean, this just should raise huge doubts in everyone's mind about Putin's willingness to seriously pursue peace. And I think most of what he is doing is applying lip service and hoping that he can sort of outweight President Trump, whose views on this war have obviously oscillated, and maybe Putin's hoping they'll oscillate one more time back in Russia's favor. So I interpret the most likely Russian motivation here being to play for time. By the way, on applying sanctions against India, that may be a good measure, but we should bear in mind that India has been more or less doing what we asked them to do in previous periods, where we didn't say to countries, stop buying Russian oil. We wanted them to keep buying it just at the lower price.
Yeah.
And so, we have to be a little careful here about not inflicting pain unfairly. But I think the general principle that we have to apply more pressure is exactly right.
Okay, Michael and Kelly, we'll leave it there. Thank you, guys.